The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Judge Morrison entered. The air was tense, sharp like a blade. On one side sat Thomas Avery, CEO of Avery Financial Holdings, a man used to controlling rooms like this. His navy suit looked tailored for war, his smirk already halfway to victory. Across the aisle, Emily Grant sat stiffly beside a worn public defender. Her pale beige blazer hung slightly loose on her shoulders, and her eyes stayed calm. Too calm for a woman accused of corporate fraud worth millions. Thomas leaned forward, voice carrying a performative disgust. "Your Honor, this woman fabricated financial statements. She embezzled from my company and nearly cost hundreds of employees their jobs. We trusted her, and she betrayed that trust." Cameras flashed from the press benches. The story had gone viral weeks ago. The billionaire's trusted assistant accused of stealing from him. It was the perfect outrage for a public hungry for scandal. Emily said nothing. Her lawyer barely opened his folder, as if intimidated by the weight of Thomas's defense team. 5 attorneys from a Manhattan firm whose lead partner, Richard Kent, was known as a courtroom shark. The judge glanced between the two sides. "We'll proceed with opening statements." Richard Kent stood, slick and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case. The defendant manipulated internal accounts and diverted funds to offshore entities under her control. The evidence is irrefutable." He flashed a polished smile at the gallery. She thought she could hide. She thought she was smarter than the system. But the numbers don't lie. As he spoke, Emily glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 11:47. Her fingers brushed against her phone on the table. One new message flashed. Just a single word. Arrived. She turned the device face down. A quiet, controlled breath left her lungs. Thomas caught the move and smirked, mistaking calm for surrender. "She won't even look at us," he whispered to Richard. "She knows it's over." When Emily's lawyer rose to deliver his statement, it barely filled a minute. "My client maintains her innocence," he said softly, clearing his throat. "We will demonstrate the evidence may not be as clear-cut as presented." The courtroom broke into low chuckles. Even Judge Morrison fought to maintain composure. By noon, Thomas was basking in triumph. During a recess, a reporter stepped forward with a microphone. "Mr. Avery, the public's expression of support for your fight against corruption has been overwhelming. How do you feel today?" Thomas smiled for the cameras. "Justice is winning. That's all I'll say." Emily walked past him quietly, ignored, dismissed as a footnote in his victory lap. Yet the faintest spark lingered in her gaze. Not fury, but something colder, deliberate. After recess, the prosecution presented evidence. Screens glowed with spreadsheets, transaction trails, and emails. Thomas's corporation appeared spotless. Emily's name showed up attached to shell transfers totaling $2.4 million. Each slide painted her as manipulative, deceitful. When asked to respond, Emily simply said, "Those documents are incomplete." Richard shot her a condescending smile. "Incomplete, Ms. Grant. These records were extracted directly from company servers." She met his gaze. "Yes, the servers you supplied." For the first time, his grin wavered. Judge Morrison motioned to proceed. "We'll note the objection but continue." As the afternoon wore on, Emily's quiet presence began unnerving Thomas. She didn't cry, didn't defend herself emotionally, just waited, eyes steady, as if the storm belonged to someone else. During witness testimony, Thomas's chief financial officer took the stand, confirming Emily had access to wire authorizations. "She acted within her role as executive assistant," he said, avoiding eye contact. When Emily cross-examined herself, allowed by her underprepared counsel, her only question was simple. "Mr. Connor, did you personally verify the offshore account signatures?" He hesitated. The documents were presented by legal. "Who's legal?" she pressed, voice even but sharp. "Mr. Kent's team," the CFO admitted. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Richard immediately objected, calling her line of questioning irrelevant. But Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Sustained, but noted. Thomas frowned. It was the first hairline crack in his perfect show. By 3 p.m., Emily's so-called defense was winding down. Her lawyer looked defeated. Cameras clicked as she gathered her stack of papers, organized, neat, labeled in handwriting far too precise for panic. Thomas stood, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "request an early verdict on the evidence already presented." The judge hesitated. A courtroom clerk entered softly, handing over a sealed note. The judge read it, blinked, and looked directly at Emily. "Ms. Grant, it appears someone has just filed an intervention request in this case. Do you wish to proceed with it?" The room went silent. Emily nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." The door to the courtroom opened. 4 people walked in. 2 men in black suits, 1 older woman in a gray skirt suit, and a younger man with the insignia of a federal office pin on his lapel. The spectators stirred. The older woman stepped forward, firm but professional. "Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Margaret Cole, counsel for the Cole Family Trust. We are here to submit an ownership claim and a series of evidentiary documents relevant to Avery Financial Holdings." Thomas's jaw tightened. "What the hell is this?" Margaret met his glare without flinching. "This, Mr. Avery, is what you've been hiding from for 6 years." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Emily simply folded her hands, her calm now revealed not as resignation, but preparation. Thomas tried to interrupt, voice shaking despite his effort to sound commanding. "This is an outrageous stunt." The federal officer spoke. "Mr. Avery, our office has been reviewing suspicious filings related to Cayman-based subsidiaries owned under your umbrella. This motion accompanies an ongoing federal audit." Judge Morrison raised a brow. "So you're saying this is connected to the defendant's alleged misconduct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Margaret answered smoothly. "The accounts used to accuse Ms. Grant belong, in fact, to trust-controlled holding companies registered under the Cole family's private fund. Ms. Grant was acting under direct authorization." The entire courtroom erupted. Media cameras clicked like machine guns. Thomas's confident smile collapsed. "She wasn't stealing from you," Margaret continued. "She was executing a covert internal review as part of a joint investment security audit, requested by her mother, Catherine Cole. And that was the moment the city learned Emily Grant wasn't just a secretary. She was Emily Cole, the heiress of one of New York's most discreet financial dynasties." Thomas leaned on the table, face draining of color. "This is absurd," he stammered. "That trust doesn't interfere in private corporations." Margaret placed a folder before the judge. "It does when its assets are laundered through them." Emily sat silent, gaze steady as the storm finally began to shift. Thomas Avery's empire, so polished and invincible, was starting to tremble. He had no idea who he had been dealing with. Thomas's face turned a deep shade of red. His attorney leaned closer, whispering frantically, but no amount of legal jargon could disguise the tremor in his hands. The judge now studied the trust documents carefully, flipping through sealed evidence tabs. Every logo, stamp, and notary signature glimmered with authenticity. Emily didn't need to speak. The quiet acknowledgement from the courtroom said everything. The scales had shifted, and everyone could sense it. Power had just changed sides. Margaret Cole addressed the bench again, her tone unwavering. "Your Honor, these transfers were designed as trap transactions to identify internal fund diversions. Ms. Grant, Miss Cole, was cooperating under federal oversight." The hush in the room was suffocating. Thomas's defenses were beginning to erode faster than he could compose himself. "That's impossible," he muttered, voice cracking faintly. But no one was listening anymore. A federal officer moved forward, setting down a second folder, thicker and even heavier. "These are preliminary findings from the IRS and SEC joint audit. Preliminary but damning," he said. "There's strong evidence of falsified corporate expense deductions under Mr. Avery's signature." When those words landed, several journalists nearly tripped over each other, struggling for position. The gallery erupted in murmurs once again, but the judge's gavel struck twice for silence. Emily's lawyer, suddenly empowered, finally found his voice. "Your Honor, in light of these revelations, we request the immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." His voice shook, though this time from adrenaline, not fear. "Moreover, we request investigation into Mr. Avery's corporate practices, given the substantial overlap with these documents." Thomas shot him a glare cold enough to kill. Emily remained impassive, eyes tracing the seal of the trust on the table. Thomas slammed his palm against his folder. "This is fabricated. They're framing me because I refuse to let that family control me. Richard Kent pulled at his sleeve, whispering that he should stop talking. But the man famed for controlling markets couldn't control his tongue now. His empire had been built on intimidation and charm, but neither worked in front of a judge. Even his voice carried a faint quiver of disbelief. He knew the ground beneath him was gone. Margaret turned toward him, her words cutting cleanly. Control you? Mr. Avery? Your greed controlled you. You took the Cole family's capital, used it to inflate your company's valuation, and hid the profits offshore while writing off losses as operational overhead. She slid a single paper forward, a notarized agreement bearing his signature. Yours, unless your handwriting suddenly changed in 2018. The proof was undeniable. The audience collectively exhaled in stunned silence. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Mr. Avery, this evidence suggests criminal-level misrepresentation. You may wish to consider counsel beyond the civil scope. Thomas's mouth opened, but no coherent sound came out. His legal team sat pale-faced, their carefully curated confidence gone. Emily watched him with a calm that was almost merciful. She wasn't gloating. She was witnessing justice unfold naturally, unstoppable as gravity. Outside the courtroom, news spread across every major outlet within minutes. Corporate Titan under federal probe. One headline glared. Emily exited quietly behind the trust's legal team as reporters swarmed. Microphones stretched toward her, but security intervened before she could answer. The winter air bit through her coat, yet her face remained serene. For the first time in months, she wasn't hiding. The story wasn't about her anymore. It was about the truth. Inside, Thomas sat as the courtroom emptied, his empire unraveling in real time. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Closed accounts, cancelled contracts, and emergency emails from his board. This isn't over, he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. But when he finally looked up, the people who once rallied behind him were gone. He was alone, cornered by the very power structure he had manipulated for years, and Emily's quiet revenge had only just begun. As the bailiff began clearing the remaining reporters, Emily paused by the door and glanced back. Thomas sat slumped at the defense table, eyes hollow, mouth tight, trying to process the collapse of his reputation. For a moment, pity flickered across her features, but only for the shell of the man he used to be. She turned away, her voice quiet yet final as she murmured to Margaret, "Let them finish what they started." Outside, the snow began to fall in slow, relentless silence. The following morning, every business headline in New York carried Thomas's downfall. His photos filled the front pages, headlined with words like fraud, federal probe, and corporate collapse. Television anchors repeated every leak, while the financial sector buzzed with nervous speculation. Investors withdrew funds, partners severed ties, and within hours, Avery Financial's stock plunged 40%. What once made Thomas unstoppable now forced his own executives to abandon him out of self-preservation. At the same time, Emily quietly returned to her apartment, now surrounded by legal documents awaiting signature. Her phone vibrated constantly, calls from lawyers, journalists, and relatives she hadn't heard from in years. But she ignored them all. She brewed coffee, took a long look at the Manhattan skyline, and for the first time since the trial began, she smiled faintly. She had fought her battle without rage, and now she watched the storm she'd survived move elsewhere. Meanwhile, Thomas convened a crisis meeting with his board behind closed doors at the Avery Tower. The room, once filled with ambition and vanity, now dripped with fear. His CFO refused to meet his gaze. The company's compliance officer laid down a resignation letter. "The SEC's already here," someone muttered. "They're freezing assets." Thomas clenched his jaw, trying to project confidence, but inside he was drowning. Every ally he had carefully purchased was cashing out. By noon, his bank accounts began freezing one after another. The trust filings had triggered cascades of automatic audits, shutting off his personal lines of credit. Private guards patrolling his estate no longer answered his calls. When his legal counsel advised filing for temporary protection under Chapter 11, he exploded, shouting that he'd never go bankrupt. But threats no longer worked. The powerful feared association with him. He was radioactive, isolated in his own empire. Emily met her mother later that evening at a quiet cafe on Madison Avenue. Margaret Cole was already seated, reading reports on her tablet. "You did well," she said without looking up. Emily took her seat, unsure how to respond. "I did what needed to be done," she replied softly. Margaret glanced up then. "You exposed a man like your father once was, arrogant, untouchable. But don't think this restores balance. Justice is not peace." Emily absorbed the words, neither prideful nor broken, only thoughtful. That night, Thomas turned on the television to find himself dissected by talk show hosts. Videos replayed his confident statements from the courthouse, now weaponized against him. "Justice is winning," he had boasted, and the clip played on repeat across social media. His own words had become his ridicule. He slammed the remote onto the floor, bile rising in his throat. All it took was one lie collapsing for decades of power to disintegrate overnight. At the SEC headquarters, agents finalized their reports, linking Avery Financial's shell entities to massive tax evasion schemes. Margaret and Emily were summoned for review. "We'll proceed with coordinated restitution orders," the agent informed them. "Once signed, Mr. Avery will lose personal control of all remaining liquid assets." Emily nodded silently. It wasn't triumph, it was closure. The system that had once ignored her now spoke in terms she understood. Accountability, balance, consequence. Late that week, gray clouds rolled over the city, mirroring the gravity of what had transpired. Thomas sat alone in his penthouse, watching lights flicker below him. What had been a skyline of opportunity now looked like an endless reminder of failure. The phone rang one last time. His attorney. The board had voted to remove him as CEO effective immediately. He sank into his chair, the echo of his previous arrogance haunting him. The mighty had fallen, and there was no one left to applaud. As dawn broke over the city, Emily walked through Central Park, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She passed joggers, vendors setting up carts, the ordinary rhythm returning around her. Pulling her scarf tighter, she paused by the frozen lake. The past months had been ugly, but necessary. Thomas had tried to destroy her life, yet in doing so, had exposed his own corruption. She didn't celebrate his ruin. She acknowledged it, quietly. Justice wasn't revenge. It was simply truth, finally revealed. Across town, Thomas packed what little dignity he had left into a leather briefcase. His driver had quit, leaving him to call a cab like anyone else. When he stepped out of his penthouse, paparazzi lights flared, capturing his fall from grace in real time. He shoved past them, muttering curses under his breath. Every camera shutter echoed his fading influence. Inside the cab, he stared blankly at his reflection in the window. The once celebrated mogul, now just another cautionary lesson about greed and arrogance. Days later, the formal SEC hearing opened in a federal building downtown. Unlike the grand courtroom of before, this room was smaller, quieter, stripped of spectacle. Thomas sat at the defense table, hunched and pale. His new lawyer spoke in low tones that carried no conviction. Emily entered with composed precision, flanked by counsel and federal representatives. This time, no one whispered about her. Everyone in the room already knew exactly who she was. The lead investigator from the SEC presented the closing summary. "Our audit confirms fraudulent activity involving multiple offshore accounts," he said calmly. "These actions were authorized directly by Thomas Avery, under false representations." Every word landed like a blow. Thomas's hands shook as he scribbled meaningless notes, as if pretending to prepare his defense. Emily watched, impassive, while her name echoed through the report as a cooperating party, cleared of all wrongdoing. Legal representatives for defrauded investors took the floor next. Dozens of victims had filed claims ranging from pension losses to misrepresented returns. "Mr. Avery's mismanagement created ripples of harm," said one attorney, "and for years, those under him were silenced or scapegoated." Emily felt the weight of those words, not as an accuser, but as someone who had once been silenced herself. Justice wasn't loud today. It was administrative, procedural, clinical. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he struggled to stand. His voice cracked as he addressed the panel. "I built this company from nothing," he said, a faint tremor in each word. "I made mistakes, but I didn't deserve this witch hunt." The investigator looked unmoved. "You didn't deserve accountability?" The silence that followed cut far deeper than any formal reprimand. Even Thomas seemed to feel it. Reality had caught him, and there was nowhere left to hide. Moments later, Judge Morrison entered to announce sentencing terms. The court ordered restitution payments totaling $120 million, personal asset forfeiture, and a federal sentence not exceeding 12 years in a minimum security facility. Thomas stared blankly at the ruling as though hearing a foreign language. Emily watched without a flicker of triumph. Her mother once told her that real justice came without applause, and she understood that now. Outside the courthouse, microphones turned toward her again. Reporters begged for comment, eager for emotion, expecting vengeance. Instead, Emily spoke softly. "The truth doesn't need to scream," she said. "It just needs to last." Then she stepped into the waiting car beside Margaret, their family attorney following behind. Cameras flashed wildly, but the story now belonged to the world. The Cole family didn't need to explain who they were anymore. Their actions had done it for them. Meanwhile, footage of Thomas's arrest spread online like wildfire. Clips of him being escorted out, no handcuffs, but surrounded by officers, looped endlessly. Online commentators debated whether 12 years was enough. Some called for harsher punishment. Others pitied his collapse. But the collective verdict was clear. Arrogance had consequences, and the mighty had finally paid the price. Reputation, they said, dies faster than truth ever could. That night, Emily returned home to her quiet apartment. The city noise carried faintly through the windows, familiar yet distant. She placed the final report in a box, sealing it shut with tape. The past belonged there now. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and breathed deeply. She didn't think about revenge, or victory, or legacy. She thought about peace, the kind that comes when silence feels deserved. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall again. The next morning, Thomas's picture covered every major channel in the country. Lawyers analyzed every decision, economists dissected every lie, and old allies called his punishment a tragedy of arrogance. He watched it all from a holding cell window, numb to the chaos outside. His empire was dismantled, his name liquidated along with his assets. He whispered something under his breath. Not denial, not anger, but disbelief at the simple truth. Power had vanished faster than he imagined possible. Across the city, Emily sat in her office at the Cole Foundation, reviewing charitable grants for small businesses. The same hands that once pushed contracts across Thomas's desk now signed documents that built futures. When Margaret entered with a faint smile, Emily looked up. "Ready to move forward?" her mother asked. Emily nodded. "Completely," she answered. The world outside was still spinning, but this time she was steering her own direction, firmly and quietly in control. Months later, Manhattan moved on, but the name Thomas Avery remained a cautionary tale whispered in corporate hallways. His former tower stood half empty, its logo removed, its reputation unrecoverable. Meanwhile, Emily's quiet influence began to reshape parts of the financial world. She introduced reforms, transparency laws, and mentorship programs for women in finance. Reporters often described her as the calm after the scandal, unaware that beneath that calm still lingered memories of humiliation she had turned into power. Thomas spent his days in a federal facility outside Pennsylvania. The routine was predictable, sterile, and for a man who once commanded hundreds, agonizingly small. Nobody obeyed him here. Nobody feared him either. He helped in the library, filed papers, kept to himself. At first, his silence was bitterness, but over months it shifted. Maybe guilt, maybe fatigue. For the first time, he confronted the truth without an audience. The only reflection left was his own. Back in New York, Emily attended a charity gala hosted by the Cole Foundation. The cameras followed her as she crossed the marble floor. Elegance without arrogance, grace without performance. Reporters asked about her journey, her victory. She deflected with measured warmth. "It wasn't about revenge," she said. "It was about restoring balance." Her words echoed through evening broadcasts, but only she understood what it really cost to stay silent while being torn apart publicly. When the night ended, she found herself on the terrace overlooking the city. Margaret joined her, wrapped in a dark coat, hands tucked in her pockets. "Your father would have been proud," she said quietly. Emily turned, thoughtful, or ashamed that it came to this. The two women stood in silence, neither smiling nor grieving, just acknowledging the storm that had passed and the clarity it left behind. Power built on truth, not ego, finally felt clean. Inside the prison library, Thomas turned a page of a worn financial ethics textbook. It felt ironic, almost mocking, yet he kept reading. A young inmate approached him asking for advice on small business accounting. For the first time, Thomas didn't lie. "Keep your books clean," he said softly. "It ends faster than you think if you don't." The man thanked him, unaware of the irony. Perhaps redemption wasn't grand. It was just learning quietly from devastation. Meanwhile, online forums buzzed with conspiracy theories about hidden wealth and secret alliances. Comment sections were divided. Some painted Emily as a hero of justice, others accused her of elite manipulation. She ignored it all. Public opinion was never her battlefield. She had already won her real war, one fought with patience, intelligence, and restraint. Let them speculate, she thought. The truth had already delivered its verdict. By spring, the Cole Foundation expanded nationally, and Emily traveled to other states, meeting financial institutions eager to collaborate. Her composure and reputation carried new weight. Each conversation reminded her of what she'd endured, the ridicule, the headlines, the doubts. They had called her weak once. Now they called her visionary. But to Emily, labels meant little. What mattered was creating a world where silence no longer equaled surrender. On a quiet evening flight home, Emily stared out the window as city lights blurred beneath the clouds. She thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the exposure, the reckoning. There was no thrill left, only peace. She reached into her purse, pulled out a silver pen once gifted by Thomas, and placed it in the seat pocket. Some reminders didn't deserve to be carried forward. New beginnings weren't marked by celebration, but by letting go completely. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the Cole Foundation, addressed to Emily. It was handwritten, the penmanship shaky but unmistakable. It was from Thomas. The note wasn't long. He didn't plead innocence or beg forgiveness. Instead, he wrote, "You were right to fight. I built an empire on lies and you built truth from its ruins. Don't let that truth be wasted." Emily stared at it for a long time, then placed it back in the envelope. Some apologies didn't require answers. Acknowledgement was enough. That evening, Emily stood at her window watching the city lights shimmer across the skyline. The same city that once devoured her reputation now illuminated her rebirth. Below, traffic moved in endless motion, people rushing through lives shaped by ambition or fear. She whispered to herself, "Never underestimate the quiet ones." A faint smile broke across her face, soft, knowing, final. The story that began in shame had ended in strength, and the silence finally felt like peace. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe for more dramatic stories every week. Now I want to hear your opinion in the comments. Do you think Thomas's punishment of 12 years and losing his fortune was enough justice, or did he deserve an even harsher sentence for his arrogance? Let me know what you think below.